Welcome to Change My Relationship podcast. On some of my podcasts, I interview a person who has gone through a specific relationship struggle and has insight to share with you. Today, I have with me Jan Tamble, and she is the Orange County leader for Umbrella Ministries, which is a ministry for moms who have lost a child. So she's going to talk about her personal experience, and then we are going to focus on just what people can say that is helpful when you're speaking to someone who's lost a child, and what people can say that is not helpful. And not to shame anyone, not to make them feel bad, but to give you insight into what does help. Because often the awkwardness of not knowing what to say is what causes us to say the things that end up not helping. So, welcome, Jan.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I should also say that Jan is a dear friend, and I've known her for quite a while, including when your daughter died, which was 12 years ago, is I think when we first were connected.
Exactly.
And yeah, so I've known her for a while and watched her go through this journey and some others, but today we're going to focus on this one. And we're going to start off with having you tell us about your daughter, Megan.
Okay. And we love to get to do this part.
Yes.
My daughter Megan's my third child, my second daughter, my third child. And I'm going to just describe her as spunky and feisty. She says what she means. She's really affectionate. I miss those hugs and cuddles. And she didn't hold back on her words ever. She just spoke her mind for sure. But she loved kids. She loved being an auntie. She loved music, her friends. She loved church. She loved to sing. And she really loved the Lord. And that part's huge in our story. She
Mm-hmm.
really did. Some things were really hard for Megan growing up, and school was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll talk about that a little bit later. But school was tough, and so was making friends. So when she landed in Tucson, she got connected to a great church in Tucson. She made some great friends that were both her age and my age, that in the end really came to surround both of us with a lot of love and a lot of care during the year of Megan's cancer. So that was a godsend. The place that she ended up, that she called home, was actually a blessing for both of us.
Yeah, because you were in California, and
Mhm.
Tucson is about a 10 to 11-hour drive.
Of which I don't drive. So it was always a flight, a
Right.
trip to get there. And either way, it's not quick. We know how airports can be, but
Mhm.
10 or 11 hours is a long journey when there was another medical emergency, and that happens often.
Well, how wonderful, though, that she had a group of people that loved her and cared for her, that you could know were there when you were not able to be there. That is a huge blessing.
And it goes way back. I was at a reunion yesterday at the church that we attended, when Megan was born, actually. And there's a person there who actually connected me in the end to Umbrella Ministries. So it's a whole nother backstory. So that was really exciting yesterday to just be able to thank those people, because even the people here in California were a huge part of my story. And often people would say I should bring Megan here
Mhm.
because my support group was here. But
Yes.
Megan's support group was there, and I could see how much she needed that. And so I'm not a desert person. I do not like the desert. But I have just a whole nother story of how, the devotional called Streams in the Desert,
Mhm.
how God just, I don't know, miraculously planted a flower when I got out of the car next to where I was parked. I think it was the only one in the, area where I was. But all these little things that made my experience truly in the desert be manageable,
Yeah.
even when it felt like it wasn't.
Yeah, that's a devotional I read like 40 years ago
It's
for
an old one.
many, many years. It's one of my very favorite devotionals.
Yeah.
Yeah, how interesting that you read that one too.
It's an old one, but
Yeah.
it sticks in my mind because now I have an experience connected and actually a visual.
Yeah.
Because and did end up in hospice at the end at a really beautiful facility. Again, we're in the desert, and I don't find it to be pretty. And the block wall around her patio blocked out all the dirt, and all I could see was the mountains and the blue skies. And it actually was really that, and the fountain that was on her patio were really calming, peaceful things for me. And that was a blessing.
Yeah, that's beautiful that you find that. I try to do that too. No matter where I am, I try to find something that is calming or linked to nature. And if I'm around something that doesn't like make me feel calm, I will look up at the sky or I'll look up at trees. And there's always something that is beautiful and calming in the environment. And so that's really cool that that you remember that being good.
And it's interesting that you say that because I don't tend to look up. And so the verse would come to my mind because when I would look over that block wall, the only option was to stare at the wall or look up. And I felt like reminded of the verse, that says, to look up, and that's where we'll see him. We'll know.
Look up into the hills from where comes your help. The Lord help is from the Lord God of
Yes. And I wish I had thought to write down exactly where it's from, but it is that exact verse. Yeah. From where my help comes from.
Yeah, from where my help comes from. There's a song with that too. So yeah, beautiful. Well, we have a lot in common. Favorite verses, favorite ways of calming ourselves. So Megan, are you willing to talk about? I mean, the bad part is the cancer. What kind of cancer was it? You say it was about a year.
So Megan, I had just lost my mom in January of 2012, and 3 months later, Megan talked about not feeling good, and she took herself to the emergency room, and they just said, it looks like there's something going on in your liver, and she had lost her job, and so she was supposed to start a new job in a week, and so in her mind, it was, I've got 90 days, and then I'll have insurance, and I'll check into it. And they gave her Oxycontin and she left the hospital, but she was going to be visiting her dad. And so she chose not to continue to take it so she could drive down safely. And I think after about 3 days, her pain was so intense that her dad took her back to the hospital where she had been in Tucson. And they ran more tests, and they found the cancer, stage 4 colon cancer, which had actually metastasized to her liver and both her lungs at that point. And so they gave her 4 months to live, 4 to 6 months. And the irony, the craziness of it was that my other daughter, my middle daughter, Amanda, was pregnant and delivered the next day, her baby.
Oh my word.
The daughter in the hospital it was like a death sentence to tell somebody 28 years old that, you have 4 to 6 months to live. And then here Amanda's having Ari, the sweetest boy, their first child. And talk about a mixture of emotion and
absolutely,
and not knowing how to handle just overwhelming raw emotion. And so I went with no sleep from the Friday night when my kids had called asking me to call back so they could tell me, and until Monday night, a couple nights later was my first night of sleep. I couldn't process it.
Yeah, no, that's a huge shock for everyone. That's like, cancer is a very horrible diagnosis to get. And when it's that terminal from the first notice or first awareness that it's there, that's like really overwhelming. But it ended up taking a year, right?
It did. It took exactly a year. So, she was given more time, and I have to believe that there's a reason for that, because I saw some things happen during that time past that 6-month mark that were important. And I think that there's something to be said for sometimes people need to come to peace in relationships and areas of their life maybe before they are able to let go and leave here, and for other people to do the same.
Yeah, definitely. Well, tell us about your grief journey.
Wow. Well, I mentioned that my mom passed away 3 months before Megan was sick, and my mom was like my best friend. My dad had passed, and I called my mom every day, and I don't know that my mom ever gave advice when I called and asked for it, as much as just, honey, it'll work out. But that was reassuring. And so, of all the people to not have here, it was so hard to not have my mom. At that point, when Megan was diagnosed, I had already had 8 deaths, and all but 2 were family. And I just felt like, I wanted to do like a timeout sign to God and hold it up to the sky and kind of say, like, we're done for now, aren't we? Like, enough is enough. And yeah, even saying that, I feel like I don't know what I would have done without my faith, honestly. But I was already so overwhelmed and like raw with my own grief. So I had gone to a program called GriefShare right after I lost my mom. And those that don't know about it, GriefShare is a great program. It's typically held in a church, and you can go on the website for their information. But when I got to the first class, the couple had lost a son, and I couldn't relate because it was just after losing my mom, and we didn't know yet about Megan's diagnosis. And I thought, I don't know if I'm going to stay in this. I can't really relate. I lost my mom, and most of the people had lost a spouse. Well, the final night of the class was right after the weekend that we found out about Megan's diagnosis. And I just thought, wow, people talk about God showed up, and that doesn't work for me. I feel like, do I have to beg him and call until he finally shows up? And that's discouraging to me. But what encourages me is realizing and looking back at how many times during that year and that whole grief journey, how God actually went before us. And that was one of the times. That was one of the first, recognitions for me that, wow, I was in the right group. This couple knew my pain. Those people just rose up around me. They got me a plane ticket. And, a few days later, I was on the plane to Tucson. But I think the biggest thing was just realizing that this is a really unique loss, though. It's different. Nobody expects their child to go first. And so that was a whole nother journey to figure out how do you manage this kind of grief? It's unexpected. I think everyone's grief is unexpected, and no one is greater or less than the next person's. And I don't want that to be heard at all here. But it is a unique loss. And there's a saying, that if you lose your parents, you're an orphan. If you lose a spouse, you're a widow or a widower. But that's not a word when you lose a child. There's not a word. There's not and you question, am I still a mom? And people ask, well, how many kids do you have? And you stumble over, do I say 2? Do I say 3? And that I'm still, 12 years later, that question throws me. Yeah. I'll be honest. And I know I have 3 children, but it just stops me in my tracks every time.
Wow, it's interesting. I know that one of the things that we might as well just say it right now is that the grief kind of lasts. Like I remember you retook a class of mine a couple months ago, and you said that night, I think this is the 12th anniversary of Megan's passing, and you had tears in your eyes. And you said, it's been 12 years, but it's so fresh still, and it still hurts a lot. Yeah. And I still need comfort, and I still need to know that people understand. And I think that's kind of the catalyst of what started this conversation that we're doing right now is just, it is different.
It's different. And I think, just to help people understand, one of the things, I had tears that night. You're right. It was before the class, even. It was something you had said, even. I know I went up to talk to you about. But one of the things I tell our moms is, I think we're always going to miss them. I don't think that's going to change. So every anniversary, holiday, whatever, their birthday or their passing day, those are monumental dates for us. And do I feel the way I felt the first year or 2? No. And I want to give that hope to moms. I want to give almost a promise, if I could promise, that the intensity of the pain is not the same as it was then. But there's so many things that can trigger the feelings, bring it back like it's right now or just yesterday. And I think that's always going to happen. I think that's our this side of heaven experience. until we're gone is whether it's a song. Somebody mentions Brandon Heath's name, and Megan got to sing with him on stage at her church in Tucson, and I hear his name and I'll have tears, just so many. I hear the two songs that got me through that year. Every time I got in Megan's old Pinto car, hot as ever with no AC, the song by Laura Story would come called Blessings, and the song at Redmond, 10,000 Reasons for My Heart to Find. And that actually spurred me on when I came back to start a journal to come up with 10,000 reasons for my heart to be able to say, I can still praise you.
Wow.
Even in the pain.
Wow.
In the pain.
Yeah. And I would think that when you have other children, or, that anything even good with your other children would bring oh, I'm never going to get to do this with Megan. Kind of like, child gets married or a child has a baby or it's like all of those. So that bittersweetness of even something with your other child that's wonderful would kind of remind you, oh, I don't get to do this. And not that and I think that's a part of grief. We're not saying that grief is bad or that the feelings are bad, because God created us and he created us in his image, and God grieves in the Bible. He talks about his grief over Israel's sins and over the fact that Israel left him, abandoned him, that he, had, and I believe isn't it, is it Habakkuk, where the book where he talks about having to divorce Israel? And, he talks all about his feelings and the grief and the loss. So, I mean, grief is healthy and necessary, and it for not just deaths, but for any loss. But so we're not saying it's bad. In fact, the more aware you are of the process and how it works and what you're feeling, the easier it will be, and the more awareness you have. And the tears are tears of remembrance. I think looking at them even as that, they're tears of love and remembrance and connection. Because when you can remember her and remember these things about her, that is part of what is healing in the grief journey, is knowing that you won't forget her.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
But she still lives on. And
I like to say to people, it's normal. Grief it's a normal reaction to any loss, job loss, a change of a church, a change of a job. You're letting something go that was important or dear to you, and how do you do that? And so I do feel like it's a process, and it's very normal. And I think sometimes when people see somebody crying, or they say something and the person cries, and we'll talk later about my experience at the restaurant the other day. Sometimes it's just tears of joy, like you're happy with the thought or whatever. But even if it's not, I like to remind people to not see it as the person's not doing well, that they're not dealing with it, or they're regressing. It's just a normal part. It's just a normal part. And when I read 2 words, Jesus wept.
Yeah.
2 words. It's got to be normal. We were made in his image.
Yeah. And so you're talking a little bit about Umbrella Ministries when you come around moms, which is the group that we mentioned at the beginning, that it is where you go and support moms who have lost a child. Now, did Umbrella Ministries come around you and support you? Or did you learn about it afterwards?
Well, I didn't even know it existed. And what happened is the church I was at yesterday that had their 50-year reunion, where we had raised our kids in the beginning, one of the women had kind of followed my story on Facebook, or just the situation with Megan's cancer. And she connected me with the pastor's wife at that time. We were already gone from the church when this pastor and his wife came, but they had lost a child, and she was the one that led this Orange County group of moms. So this mutual friend connected us literally the day after I got home from Tucson.
Wow.
They invited me to attend a West Coast conference. We have an annual conference on the West Coast, one in Colorado, one back east. And I said yes with a lot of hesitation. I drove myself. I thought, if I want to get out of there, I've got an escape plan already in my head. But that was the start of my journey with them. For me, I did go back to GriefShare about 6 months later, but because GriefShare is weekly, that's a positive thing. I think in the beginning, when your emotions are so raw and you need somewhere to talk about it and you need support around you and surrounding you, I think that's a really helpful difference. We meet monthly. I had not even been to one of their monthly meetings yet. And I went to this conference, and the mom who both sang and shared had also lost a daughter in an accident. And I just felt like I know I absorbed what I could, and it probably was only minuscule compared to what was presented, but that's all I could take in. But that was the start of my connection with Umbrella Ministries here on the West Coast, and joining that group that the pastor's wife led. And eventually, when they retired and moved to South Carolina, I was asked to take on that group. And I just feel like it's an honor and a privilege because it's a way I can give back. Those moms supported me. They walked with me. And I don't think anyone can do grief alone.
No.
I think it's not healthy.
Right.
And I think it's possible. I think, we're meant to be in community, and we're meant to share the burdens. I mean, it makes it lighter. It doesn't take it away.
No.
But it makes it lighter.
Yeah, totally. And I totally agree with that. Okay, now we're going to get into the nitty gritty here. What were some of the things that people said to you, or that that people can say when somebody is not just grieving the loss of a child, but any loss, right? We want to talk about any loss. Your experiences with grieving mostly I mean, obviously you lost lots of people in your life, but including your mom. But what are some of the things that help you with grief?
Okay. I hate to do this, but I'm actually going to start with the negative stuff.
Okay, that's fine. That's another one of our questions.
I know that's the next question, and
my gut feeling was to start with the negative, but
I know, and
I wasn't sure.
I even wrote that down. I hate to do this, but I'm going to start with the negative, and the only reason is, we're in so much pain, and again, this doesn't apply just to someone who's lost a child, but obviously the specifics of what I'm going to talk about are some of those things that were said when I lost Megan. And one of the hardest ones that hurts so much is when people ask, well, you have other children, don't you? And you kind of feel like, yeah, I do, but could we trade and let's send yours off and let me get mine back, because apparently it won't bother you.
Yeah.
And I know that's not what the person means. And in everything that I'm going to say right now, please know we get, as we start to heal, that people mean well.
Yes.
Their words are well intended. And I probably said some of this stuff myself and had no idea
that you were saying that.
Figured inside that person that's grieving their loss, and how maybe it didn't help them, and it actually created more depression.
Well, I think people actually say it out of awkwardness and not knowing what to say, and they sort of grasp at straws. So I don't think they're being mean. I think they just don't know what to say, especially as the grief goes on later. It's kind of like, well, I know what to say. I'm sorry for your loss, things like that, when it's really close and it just happened, or it's the memorial service or what. But years down the line, it's like, well, what do you say? It feels really awkward.
And I think the thing that you said, and I'll say it again probably soon, is just to be able to say I'm sorry, because nobody can change it. And so, some of the hard things, and I know we've talked about the don't letter, a letter that was written, and we're not still sure who wrote the letter, but it's about what not to say, followed up with what to say. And so some of those things were, will you have other children, or, do you have other children? Well, I have moms in my group, they've lost both their children. They had an only child, and now they have none. And so that first Mother's Day, comes around, and they don't know what to say to people. They're asking themselves, am I still a mom? Am I a mom anymore? And so it triggers those emotions again. I think some of the hard things, and this is me saying it even as a believer, some of the hard stuff was people either quoting verses or saying, well, at least you know where she is, or at least you know you'll see her again, or at least she's not in pain anymore. Well, I'm the first to want my daughter not to be in any pain anymore. I watched her lose 100 pounds. And, the year went by and the year was just increased pain on a daily basis. And of course, I didn't want that for my daughter. And of course, I'm relieved she's not in pain. But some of the comments, I do know I'm going to see her again. So now, 12 years later, it's easy for me to just be grateful about that and even be able to celebrate that part. There's a day and a time I'm going to get to see her. It's true. But initially, those words actually hurt.
Okay.
Because we want him here now. Again, we want to say, can I trade out my daughter? And I'd like to have her back to see a wedding and children and all the things that, to finally graduate from college. So as her friends started graduating, those were triggers. And as her friends started to get married and have children, I'm happy for them. And to this day, I'm happy for them. And their kids now are, 12 years old and they have their degrees. But there was a sadness that didn't happen for Megan. And those were goals she wanted in her life.
Yeah.
So some of them are hard to hear at first.
Yeah. And to say something like, well, just, maybe focus on other things in your life and move forward. How is that received?
Oh, we're lucky. You're lucky we stand there still and don't just walk away. Honestly,
So why does that hurt so much?
It hurts because two things. We will never move on. There's no such thing. They're always a part of us.
Okay.
Like I carried my child connected with an umbilical cord my whole 9 months. We were tied together, in every way for her to eat, to breathe, or whatever. So that part, moving on is a phrase I try not to use. What we tend to say that I think to me works better is to talk about moving forward. How do I go from here and not stay stuck in my grief that does feel overwhelming initially and like it's never going to let up and the intensity is never going to go away? How do I get from that place or not accepting it? And wanting it to be different than it is. That can help us stay stuck too. How do I go from there to moving forward, to finding that I wake up and I still have breath, so it means I'm still supposed to be here and there's something meant for me to do. And being able then to start to pursue those things, not forgetting our child because we won't.
Right.
Maybe not being able to avoid the triggers that come when you least expect it. We all know the tears come when it's the least convenient time, if there is a convenient time. And so it's how do we, we talk about a new normal, because it'll never be the same. I now have one less child here on earth and one less of many celebrations I had planned on. So we talk instead about how do I move forward, kind of embracing embracing the grief as we are moving into acceptance.
Right. And the acceptance is the end of the grief process or the place that you're working through the grief so you can get to that acceptance. Can you think of any more?
Any more about
things that are hurtful? No, things that are hurtful that people say.
Hurtful. And the main things I think were, us not wanting, I think it's us not wanting them to forget, like our child's now passed and gone and they're out of our mind because they won't be. And so I think really that leads me to the things that are helpful to say.
Okay.
And one of the best comments I think that was made to me, my son-in-law's brother pastored a Messianic church and, studied in Israel. And he said to me that, in Western culture, we don't really understand how to grieve, which impedes, or impairs our healing then, number one. But Jewish tradition did know how. There's sackcloth and ashes. They had wailers even that wailed. I mean,
for you. They wailed for you.
Yes. Yeah,
It didn't have to be your own wailing, which is perfectly fine if you need
right.
to, but they actually had people that wailed.
Yes.
Isn't that crazy? That's so hard to imagine in Western culture, but
But it's hard to imagine because we live in a fast food society where we drive through and pick. I'm the first to do it. That's why I go to Starbucks instead of Pete's, because Starbucks is drive through and I'm impatient, you know. But everything we do here is quick, neat, tidy, and move on. And so it doesn't allow a place or a space
for grief.
for grieving. And without that, how do we get to healing? Or how do we work through grieving towards healing? And it, to this day, 12 years later, Scott's words still resonate with me. And the reality that, wow, because if we do try and stop the grieving, which stops the healing, we stay stuck.
Yeah.
We do. And so some of the things, I think some of the really helpful things that people said, and I'm going to be honest, is I'm sorry. And I have no words. I don't know what to say. I have no words. That's the truth. And we can sit well with that. We don't have words or answers either. We want them, but nothing's immediate, that's for sure. And so it's almost like it puts a stamp of approval for us. It's okay to be where you are.
And it's not discounting, it's validating. So all of the things I was thinking as you were saying them, and then we have the don't letter that the don't letter, like what not to do and what to do. I'm gonna put a link to it below the podcast notes,
Great.
or the YouTube video notes, so you can link to it and download it for yourself for those that are listening. But when I look back over those, it's like the things that are hurtful or harmful, they're discounting. They're discounting and minimizing of your pain, and the things that are helpful are validating. So when you say, I have no words, I don't know what to say, that's saying to you, boy, that was huge. That's a huge loss. That's a big deal. And that feels like people understand.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I think that's why that actually
the moms that say, I can't even imagine. It's true. I couldn't either. And I certainly could imagine I could ever get through something like this, you know, and again, not move on, but move forward, be able to celebrate life, to be able to enjoy the good things that are still around me and the good things that still happen for me and for others.
And then remembering the date of your child's like birthday or the child date of your loss. And that is, I was convicted reading that because there's somebody close to me that I've not been good about that because I'm not good on anniversaries and birthdays and I'm really busy, but I need to do a better job. And I'm actually going to apologize to her. And I haven't decided if I'm going to call her or send her a card. I'll probably send her a card. She's really big on sending cards. And I'm just going to tell her I'm so very sorry for not remembering the birthday and the anniversary of his death because I love her and I know her. And that's more important than remembering the birthdays of people that are alive. If I can't do that, then but I don't want that to be hurtful to her.
Yeah.
And so I'm actually gonna do that after reading this letter and thinking about this topic. So I don't know, that I hope will make up a little bit for me being so lax with that. And it's anything else?
I can tell you she'll appreciate your apology. She really will, because the first year people remember. The
Yeah.
first year, all the significant anniversaries, the birthday, the passing, holidays, all of that. People remember that first year. It's fresh for them as well. In year two, I hate to say this, but we say that's a harder year. And it's because for everyone else, their life does go on. And that's not wrong. And we're not mad about it. But ours, we are just coming out of being numb.
Yeah.
And now it's very real. And it becomes even more real as we feel like we're the only ones that remember those things. My sister-in-law to this day still sends a card or text, and I'm so grateful. And my daughter calls. But those are still days that we are never going to forget. And we're reminded on not even the day up, but leading up to it. So many of my moms in my group will say the same thing, that they're really struggling. And then they look back and they realize it wasn't just the day of, it's the weeks coming up to it. And other people aren't understanding those emotions. You know, I hate to liken it to say, you know, when when you have your period, how you are beforehand,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
your emotions are, they just feel out of control. And then you're like, oh, this makes sense.
Yeah.
Now I
Yeah.
realize
I,
why.
I know that too, the people in my life that have grieved like losses, and that it is as oh, it's coming up to that anniversary. It's like, and I'll just be honest, like my daughter lost a boyfriend to suicide way back when she was 18, and for 15 years she still celebrated that death. And I mean, not celebrated, she was struggling with the anniversary of that death. And there were times that I would want to say to her, just get over it, like move on. And, especially because it was, a boyfriend when she was younger. But that was a big deal to her, and it's very painful. And that was me not understanding and not being at times super empathetic, quite honestly, because I wanted her as a mom just to be like, okay, it's like you're living, like be
Right,
okay.
right.
And that doesn't help,
Yeah.
that doesn't help at all. So,
Or to say, count your blessings, look at all you still have two beautiful children, and you have,
yeah,
like, look at everything around you and how
yeah,
God's blessed you. It isn't that we've forgotten those,
no,
because
no,
we haven't, but right now this other thing is really overwhelming. And,
yeah,
we're just trying to put pieces back together as something that sort of
yeah.
imploded in our life. The
And
big, go ahead.
no, and I think the simple thing to say to people, if you can't remember the specifics, is just to say the things that are validating, like, I'm sorry, there are no words, like, just give them a hug. The other thing that you mentioned, and I've also heard that really struck me, is ask the person about their child and use the child's name.
Yes,
Like,
yes.
tell me about Megan. And now I'm going to let you tell me, just because we jumped into it. I want you to tell the story of what
Okay.
happened
Um,
about this
and then
podcast and your notes.
back to the ministry of presence too. I want to make sure
Okay.
to talk about that. So, just short story, but I was at IHOP the other day, and I was just really going over the questions that you had asked me to focus on. And when I finished writing, I kind of finished up the final question. It was like, what's something you would want people to know, or what would I want to say? And I wrote it down. It was 2 sentences I wrote down. And then I put all my things back in my bag to leave. And there was two women that sat down at the table behind me. And so when I went to put my things in my bag, I noticed this woman's hair, her beautiful, really, really short hair, looked a lot like Jamie Lee Curtis, when she has that super short cropped hair. And that's how my daughter's hair looked when it started to grow back in. She had had her head shaved, so she was bald as she started to lose so much hair, and how discouraging that was for her. And so when it was shaved, it grew back in, and it grew back in like a auburn color. Well, I saw this woman's hair, and literally it was like seeing Megan's head. And I just I had tears, but I started to talk to her and compliment her on her hair and just say how beautiful it was. And she said, well, most people, ask if I had cancer. And she said, I didn't. I just did this, and it's total freedom. And I said, well, I love it because it looks just like my daughter who did have cancer. It looks just like her hair. And so, she said, I'm sorry, about losing my daughter. But then she said, what's your daughter's name? And tell me about your daughter.
Wow.
And so I said, just a minute. And I grabbed my notepad out of my bag. And I said, just read these 2 sentences. And it was the answer to what you had asked me about. Is there some final thing I would want to say to people? Those 2 sentences I wrote, and I capitalized them. So they were big and bold. And I said, please ask us about our child. Please ask us to tell you about our child, and please say their name. And I started crying because it was actually sweet tears that somebody did that. I didn't have to ask them. And they didn't ask any of the hard questions or make the hard comments. I was
Yeah.
so grateful. And so after we talked a little bit, she said, but I really want to hear more about Megan. Like, she remembered her name and then continued the conversation. And it meant the world to me. a total stranger. She doesn't know me. She doesn't know my story. She doesn't know all I've just said to you.
Yeah. And
So
just really, really like it was a picture of exactly what you had just written that you wanted people really to grasp. And and this thought just came to my mind. Is it helpful or hurtful to ask, what did she die of? Is that not a good thing? Does that bring up too
no,
much negative?
and she
That's
did
okay.
ask, but she asked after she wanted to hear about Megan. Then she asked it.
Okay.
It is okay. It is okay. Um, I think it almost deserves a follow up again of I'm sorry or something, because otherwise you both stand there and it's awkward.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's okay to say, definitely.
Okay.
And I think sometimes then people, by knowing, it is less awkward that way.
Yes. And so that's okay. It
I think,
doesn't bring up because I'm always kind of afraid. I feel like, oh, is that too personal or am I bringing up too much negative? Yeah, but you're saying that at least for you and for other moms, it's okay to ask what
yeah,
happened.
it is okay for me. I'm not uncomfortable by it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I think we've gone through a lot of the
Mhm.
questions. Is there something else that you can think of? I'm going to put up the don't let her. I'm definitely going to, let's see if there's any, um, just some of the other things that help. It says cry with us if you want to. I know
Gus.
have told me how healing it was for a therapist even that listened to them to actually get tears in their eyes
Mhm.
when they were sharing that pain to to literally again, this is letting you know that people feel
Right.
actually what you're feeling or at least can understand and they're validating. So I think really a lot of it is just validating and then remembering that your daughter she was a person. She really was someone. And it
Right.
gives you a chance to, like you said, remember her and
Mhm.
to almost think of her and it's happy tears, it's tears of remembering,
Want to share,
everything about her.
like we want to share our child with someone. We want them to know our child as
Hmm.
much as the ones that are living, and that allows us to do it.
Yeah.
I know you read from the letter, and it'll say both things not to say and things to
Mhm.
say. You post that. But one of the things that isn't mentioned a lot, but I think is beginning to be, is this idea of a ministry of presence. And
Mhm.
what I found is sometimes, there's not always words to say. And sometimes all we needed was the hug
Mhm.
or them just sitting with us. And so after Megan's service here in California, two friends came back to the house with me to bring some flowers and some things that I had put out that were, memories of Megan's. And they didn't have any magic words because there
Right.
aren't any. Nothing's going to change
No.
the situation. I was so overwhelmed because this is the home that my kids were raised in. This is where Megan, she was born here. And the thought that I came home to a house that
Come
she
back.
wouldn't come back to it,
Yeah.
would never come visit this house again. I really struggled with that. And so one of the friends just sat with me. The other one, was kind of like Mary and Martha, and one just went about organizing and unloading the car and bringing things in and doing that part of it. And the other one just sat with me. And
Mhm.
that's what I needed. And, I refer to it as a ministry of presence.
Uh-huh.
We met this month at a restaurant, my group. It's something we do once a year and talk about the conference that we had just gone to. And one of the moms just needed somebody to listen, just needed time. And it's been, I think, 3 years now for her. And I didn't think of it as she slipped back or she's not doing well today. Her son's birthday was going to be in about 4 days. So she was anticipating that. And sometimes we just need somebody to listen. And sometimes we just need somebody to sit with us because that's a way to affirm
Yeah.
the fact that there's tears or that we are just grieving or we're sad right then. It's okay. You
Mhm.
like their approval, with their arm around you or them just sitting with you. And if you're the kind of person that maybe wants to ask permission, that's okay too.
Okay.
Sometimes I've had people say, "Can I hug you?" I'm a absolutely yes, you can hug me person. But that allows somebody who maybe isn't comfortable with that, to say, that's okay. And then that maybe they don't need that right now. They're going to get a hug from somebody else later, but I'm a person that's good with that. And so maybe asking permission or, even saying, can I ask you about your child? And if they're not in a place to talk about it, it gives them permission to say, well, maybe another time.
Okay, perfect. I like that. And then also, again, thinking back to when someone cries,
Yeah.
in Western culture, we're not comfortable with grief, and when someone breaks down, our first instinct, if we're not, accustomed to that or haven't really thought it through, is I gotta make this person feel better to get this person to stop, and that
Right.
isn't the best thing for that person. The best thing for that person is to be able to let it out and to be, like you said, validated or just supported. And sometimes that support is saying nothing. Like
Yeah.
Job's friends. I think in Job's friends, didn't they sit with him for a week and
Mm-hmm.
just said nothing?
Yeah.
And then after that, they opened their mouth and they started saying really stupid things.
Yes. That's,
So,
that's a perfect example of a
yeah,
book, of how to do it and how not to do it.
exactly.
It really,
They had it right for a week and then they couldn't handle it anymore. All the things that were running through their head started just coming out and
Mhm.
causing problems for them.
And
So,
again, maybe it is because they now get up and they move on with their life. And we're still trying to figure out what is a new normal? Where do I go from here? What do I do with the memories? What do I do with their clothes? What do I do with their things? You know what I mean? We're just at the start of the grieving process.
well, and then understanding, like you said, that you said the first year we're just coming out of like the shock and the
Mm-hmm.
denial, and that sounds crazy, but the shock denial is actually it's like a helpful
Yeah.
emotionally and physically. God created us in that we go through that because the denial is like a shock absorber, to where you don't feel it as intensely, because if you felt it too intensely at first, it would be so overwhelming you couldn't deal with it. So it's actually that little cushion, and it takes a while to slowly kind of come out of that and get to where, but when you're in that shock denial, one of the one of the actual physiological things that happens as a result of that is your brain does not work well. It's part of being in that fight flight, is what it really is. You're shut down to your rational thinking, you're shut down to problem solving. And so you have a really difficult time with functioning, like putting on your shoes, figuring out what to wear,
Mm-hmm.
figuring out how to, like, what to take care of. So have people that are in your life, what's really helpful is to say, what do you need me to do? Like anything, just tell me. I don't care if it's like cleaning out a closet or if it's answering letters or if it's making phone calls or if it's cooking a meal or whatever it is, or cleaning up your house, driving you to an appointment. What do you need me to do?
Yeah.
That's
I'll
super
be
helpful.
honest on that one. A lot of times people will say, let me know if you need anything. I'm
Okay.
going to tell you, the grieving person's not going to call you and say what
Uh,
they, it's not
okay.
going to, if they even know what they need.
Okay.
And so sometimes it's that you see the clothes are hanging on the clothesline, you go take them down for them.
Okay.
You see that they dump the load of laundry on the couch and it needs to be folded, and you just start folding while you're talking to
Mhm.
them or whatever. But we're probably not going to pick the phone up and say, this is what I need.
Uh,
Which makes it hard for people to know. I get that, and nobody's a mind reader. But one of the things I had written down was to talk about brain fog.
mhm.
And and they talk about it with cancer too, cancer fog. And if you've ever seen a James Pollock picture of artwork that he's done, and it looks like he's flung paint everywhere on the canvas, like just flung it. And it's like a mass of just color dripping everywhere. Okay. It's like that, or a ball of yarn, or a bowl of spaghetti. It's just wound in all different directions. And so that brain fog's a reality for the person that's grieving. I'm going to just say, we're not in our right mind.
No,
We're not. We
no.
can't think clearly. We can't sort things out. We're trying to just get our feet out of bed and put shoes on and walk out of the bedroom. And so it's very real. And I want to encourage people to give grace, give a lot of grace to the person.
Yeah, that's
You
good.
know, if they don't call you, or if they don't call and say what they need, or they start to isolate, you pick up the phone. Like,
Mhm.
um, don't expect a lot, maybe is what I'm saying, and just give a lot of grace as they're trying to figure out how to go forward, how to start living and breathing the next day, without, and not just child, but any loved one. This applies to anyone grieving.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember, I think it was Joan Didion. I can't even think of the name of the book now. She wrote a really powerful book about the loss of her husband.
Mm,
And she said things like, I stood in front of the closet for like an hour trying to figure out, what to wear. And that was never a hard decision for
right.
me. And it was just functioning is very difficult. So, any other things that you wrote down that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, one thing I do want to mention, and you had her on recently, was Christine Lister, because she and I had some very similar things about grief, and one of them is I just want to mention, sometimes the people that are closest to you, family or friends, are the people you think will help you through it,
Hmm.
and the reality is that sometimes that's not the case,
Yeah.
and so her word for it is process people. So she actually gave me, the language, the verbiage for what those people were in my life. And there were many. And some came out of Tucson and Megan's church family that came alongside me. Some were people here, all these moms I didn't know who had lost a child. So they certainly understood the path I was on. But those people are invaluable, and they might not be many, and they might not be the people you either expect or hope will be there for you.
Hmm.
But I really believe God brought the right people for me. And of course, one group was Umbrella Ministries. But and I was lucky to have a best friend who was by my side through it all. I'm so grateful. But don't be surprised if
It's
it is other people than who you expect. And again, then there has to be grace for the ones that aren't there for you, whatever their reason is. Um, for whatever reason they can't, I do believe, like, keep your eyes open for the people that I believe God puts in our path to be those people for us, because they're there and they know best how we feel. And
and if they're not there, do reach out to a group like Umbrella Ministries, which we're
yes.
going to put the links to all of
Mhm.
that in the podcast notes, like, or to GriefShare, so that you can find this is like any other like problem, that
Mhm.
you deal with.
Mhm.
Finding people who have gone through it are the best people to walk you through it.
Exactly.
And that's why we have support groups that are specific to. So next question I have is Umbrella Ministries, whether you've lost a child to sickness, to an accident, to suicide, to a murder, do you come beside all those moms?
We do. And I'm going to add in there that sometimes, the best thing is to find a therapist that also deals with grief.
Yeah.
That's a really important piece. Sometimes medication, I understand that. So there's different tools that we want
Hmm.
people to utilize. In Umbrella Ministries, we have moms from all different situations. Sometimes they attend our group and GriefShare. Sometimes they attend our group, and there's a group called Solace for Hope, I know, that deals with when it's drug overdoses. So there are some specifics.
Hmm.
And though I'm not on Facebook anymore, Umbrella Ministries has a Facebook page
Okay.
and a website as well. And you'll be able to get all the
Yeah.
information for areas, groups, and conferences there.
And there's With Hope is a group I know that walks besides people who've lost a family member to suicide. And then there is like Mothers Against Drunk Driving Mad. They come beside you when you've lost a family member, not just a child, but a family member to a drunk driving accident. So, I mean, there are specific groups, but I have referred multiple people to you when I come across somebody who's lost a child. I always give them your number because I just think the power of having somebody personal to walk, like you will call that person and
Yes.
be willing to meet with that person and you understand, and you'll talk to them on the phone if they're struggling at a certain point, and then you have your group meetings. And that's just I spent a lot of years in 12 step, and that's invaluable, not just to have the meetings, people who understand, but actually somebody you can call when you're struggling,
Yeah.
and somebody who will sit there and listen to you, or come meet with you and actually like listen to you. So what would you give me some thoughts, final thoughts to those listening on how to support somebody who's lost a loved one? Just, I mean, I guess you can remind us. I think we said what? Ask their name and ask us about our child or our family member.
Right.
And probably we've said just to validate and just be there. And what about those who have actually lost a loved one? What would you say to that person?
To that person, I would say that there's hope and there's healing.
Mm.
And I had also preface it with it's hard work.
Yeah.
Grieving is hard work.
Yeah.
And getting to a place of healing is hard work. It doesn't come natural. So we need those process people, we need those groups, we need whatever tools, and there's lots of different ones, and different things work for different people. But I think we have to be intentional. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a challenge. When you have brain fog, it's hard to be intentional about
Well,
anything.
I think you have to give yourself grace during that time too, and just say, look, this is the best I can do right now. And there's a reason, understanding that with all of these things that go along with grief, there's an emotional and a physiological and maybe even a spiritual reason that you're experiencing that, and that it's normal. And if you don't know if it's normal, then you go to a therapist or somebody who will help you figure out, is that normal? Like, is there something to be worried about, or is this just part of the grief process? Because I think understanding the grief process, when I feel like any part of grief at all, I tell myself, oh, you're feeling angry because you're grieving that loss, or this is the pain that's going on inside you right now, is you're actually grieving this, and it feels really uh, good to understand why I'm feeling the way I am. And it's great to know that it won't last forever, that it does get to the point where you work through it and you reach acceptance. And I recently heard somebody say, after acceptance with grief comes hope. And I love that, because after you do accept it, it doesn't mean you're stuck. It's kind of like, well, what's next? And that's the hope of whatever that is, the hope that you'll be able to move forward, or you'll be able to minister to others, or whatever that is. The hope is what's really beautiful. So
Finding joy in life again, because
yeah,
being able to see
yeah,
the blessings because they're there, you know, and maybe that's not what we need to hear in the beginning again
yes,
of count your blessings. You've got all these good things, that's not where we're at in the beginning.
right,
But the hope is that with the healing, we come to that place that we can see those things because,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that, to know that you're going to be able to feel joy again,
yeah.
and that you'll be okay,
Mhm.
you know. And I really like that. So I think that's a great place to stop. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I truly hope this is helpful for people, in any kind of grief, but in particular, I reach out to the moms who have lost a child and
Yeah.
want to support them.
Yes, and I'm going to put all of the links to the organizations we talked about, to the Don't Letter, and also you are associated with the Orange County, California,
Right.
USA group. And so if they contact that group, which I think I can put a link to that too.
Yes. And
Uh,
definitely to the website. And then that way they
they
can
have,
see groups, other leaders' numbers and
or
information.
you. I'm not going to put your personal contact, because then you're going to get spam stuff to you.
Oh, okay.
So I'll just put the Umbrella Ministries link, which is umbrellaministries.org, and you are listed on there as running the Orange County, California group. There's other groups, so please look for something in your area. And then the Facebooks is under Umbrella Ministries Grief Support, and you can find the grief support book group there, which is really helpful. And then, of course, that don't letter that we referred to, which is actually very beautifully written. So,
It really is. And it's followed by what to say. So,
yeah, what to say. So, okay, well, thank you for listening to this podcast or video on, or watching this video on Change My Relationship. Please, if there's somebody that you know that you think that this would help, and maybe even somebody that you feel like needs to know how to better support you, or maybe is frustrated that you got upset about certain things, if you feel like that's a good idea, go ahead. I've had people do that, like, here's why I've been so frustrated, and it's kind of been validating and helpful to the person. Send it to them. So thank you for being here, and we look forward to having you next time. God bless you.
thank you.